women don't talk enough about money. And we don't talk enough about the fact that money is clout, and where you put your money is where innovation is going to happen and where things are going to happen. There's this like weird, I don't know what it is. It's like some kind of polite idea that if we understand finance and if we understand our bodies, we're somehow not delicate enough. I don't know what it is. Like, I've never particularly tried to be delicate, but there's a sense of like, if we can get those two things right, if we can get money and our body autonomy right, we've changed the world.
That quote is from today's episode, and that was Carrie speaking. So she was co-CEO until recently and is still investor at Clue. Clue, she helped scale it. You may know it. It's pretty much a leading femtech app that helps like track your menstrual cycle and fertility and just understand your data. Today, it's in 3 different segments. The first part is really about like the effect of leadership on personal strengths and weaknesses, as well as just challenges of work-life balance. The second one is the value of non-technical expertise in consumer tech and data privacy challenges in femtech. And thirdly, we're talking about something which is just the future of femtech and women's health data. Maybe you know a lot about the sector, maybe you don't, but this is valuable for you and just a really interesting conversation, I think. So enjoy.
This is the Gen Z in STEM podcast. I'm your host, Madron, and I hope you're as excited as I am. Let's get to it. So when you arrived, so like you said, you were general counsel and then you were like co-CEO. So then there's like a lot of different things that you take on and do. I don't know, maybe like could you elaborate a bit on like kind of the different things you could deal with in like a week or a day or in general? And also how like Clue kind of maybe like shifted, because obviously when you came on it was maybe a bit smaller and then it grew quite a bit. So how the dynamics shifted during your time there?
I mean, it was a wild ride, and anybody going into a startup needs to know that it is a wild ride. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not a predictable job. You don't know what you're going to do because you need to show up and do whatever needs doing. So for me as as the lawyer, I did anything from partnership contracts to employment issues to data privacy things. I later employed a really good specialist data privacy lawyer, and she's still with the company. So, I mean, that's obviously an area that benefits from like specialist expertise. But to, of course, the investment documentation when we did a big funding round, all of these things. Now, as CEO, of course, that goes up to another level of abstraction in the sense that you're responsible for absolutely anything. So you come in the morning and the kitchen's a mess, right? Maybe you spend 5 minutes on that, or like making a fuss about the fact that it's a mess, and then you have investor calls. Then there's some crisis with an employee, then you might have a management team meeting and look at the metrics and redirect people's attention to something that feels like the most urgent thing. Then you spend time, especially when you're either scaling up or restructuring, which you're pretty much constantly doing as a startup, right? It doesn't only get bigger, it has to sometimes also get smaller. It sometimes has to change depending on the changing needs of a company. A company that is very young is going to have a lot of very quick sort of iterations of itself. And so trying to strike that balance between evolving teams, and that means roles and reporting structures and responsibilities in a way that best suits the moment, and not messing people around all the time because people hate to be messed with, obviously. That's a constant challenge, a huge, and that's something that you spend a lot of time on as CEO.
Yeah. And what did your like time teach you about like leadership, I guess, and also I guess about the sector?
How much time do you have?
I mean,
okay, so the sector, it taught me everything about the sector. I wasn't from the sector before, right? I was a regulatory lawyer who worked across sectors. So I did everything from like as a regulatory hired gun essentially in private practice. So at a big international law firm, I did everything from the automotive industry to nuclear to mining to advertising standards, basically regulatory law in the sense of wherever the state has created a framework within which different actors have different roles and responsibilities.
Okay.
So not just sort of commercial disputes between two people that fall out, but anyway, so sector-wise, I mean, it was fascinating to just learn more about consumer tech,
Okay.
which shapes all of our lives, right? I mean, we use so much of it in such a natural way, and I'm sure your generation does way more than even I do, and way more intuitively. I certainly know my daughters are just like native, even though they don't have phones yet. But I don't know how they do it, but somehow they get hold of a phone and they just know what to do. And I think it's really, really important, again, that not just sort of tech nerds do tech, that women do tech, because traditionally that has not so much been the case, that people with different backgrounds find ways to influence what technology is, what it's for, what values it implements. So I learned everything I know about the sector in those years. And in terms of leadership, I mean, it's such a weird and sort of spongy term, right? We talk about leadership a lot, or at least some people talk about it a lot, and people mean different things by it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I guess it means the ability to get to organize other people into a common endeavor, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are many different ways to do that. I think a lot of the traditional models have a very male ring to them. There's a lot of, there's a lot of war metaphor, a lot of sort of glorified, yeah, I like a lot of like, I don't know, like skinny nerd dudes who've definitely not been to war acting like they had, and using, the Reader's Digest version of Marcus Aurelius to pretend that they're a sort of Roman strategist or something. And I get it to some extent. There is, of course, a competitive element to leading a company, hopefully to success. It's a competitive world. You do, take flak, put your head above the parapet, lead an offensive, right? These are all highly, highly charged. This is highly charged language. And sort of just sitting around and holding hands isn't the answer either. But long way of saying, I think the thing about leadership is it really exposes who you are.
Okay.
Because it puts you under the spotlight, right? Even in a relatively small organization, we were 75 employees, we were 130 employees, we were back down to 80 employees. I mean, but if you're the person making decisions and having a big impact on people's day, one way or another, you're under the spotlight, and that really magnifies, I think, your strengths and your foibles and your uncertainties. And so it's a really just fascinating journey of self-knowledge if you're a little bit reflective, because you realize that everything you do has such big repercussions. And it makes a lot of sense to me that a lot of, big CEOs are sort of narcissists, sociopaths, because it's probably a lot easier if you're not reflecting, right? It's really hard to stand there and know that you're being seen by so many people, and to know that your mistakes will be magnified, and that not everyone's going to love whatever decision you make, but you have to make a decision. And often making one quickly is better than making a better one too slowly. And even that is a decision, right? Even that is a trade-off.
Right. And to have like that much, I guess, also the responsibility, because you have a whole team and you're seen, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it would come also with pressure. So, I mean, how do you
Yeah.
navigate that pressure? Like, did you have any methods, or how do you deal with it?
I mean, everyone I know who runs a startup is under a ton of pressure. I've not seen anyone do it without, really hustling all the hours. I wish there was a beautiful work-life balance answer to this, but I don't think there is. Certainly not in venture-backed tech. These people are investing a lot of money. They expect a return, and it is a bit of a land grab situation. You can't just sort of calmly. I don't know. Maybe someone could, right? I couldn't, and I don't know anyone who could. So how do you deal with the pressure? I think you have to be someone who can take a lot of pressure, honestly. And obviously being healthy is important. Didn't always manage that. Having friendships that are outside of work is important. Didn't always manage that. Yeah. I don't think there's real wisdom here, to be honest.
Okay.
It's just tough. It's just tough and very rewarding when it works, right?
Okay. And so I just want to go back a bit, because you did say you did like many different things. You were in law and like across many different sectors. So actually, I'm quite curious, how did you actually like decide to go to Clue? And like you were saying, I mean, there's like a lot of tech people, I guess, in these sectors. It's important to have other aspects to it too. So how did you get to this sector? And, what would you say about like, navigating your own path, or like finding a path? Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, it was a little bit of a coincidence. I was at a point in my career, in my legal career, where the question was sort of, do I lean in for partnership or do I do something else? And this came up, and I was immediately struck by the mission. I had not before been able to work for a company that was really trying to create something that really benefits people. And that was very, very motivating to me, especially having just had my second child and having had it in a different healthcare system. So I had my first daughter in the UK, my second daughter in Germany, and just realizing how random the healthcare guidelines are. I mean, having babies has got to be pretty similar everywhere. Like, I can't imagine the data is that different. And yet, what people tell you about what you're supposed to do or not do, what is considered the standard of care, like, it was shockingly different. And as a longtime taxpayer and like pretty healthy person, it was shocking to me that, like, by and large, the service was so shit. It's like, it's a predictable event in most women's lives, right? We pay a lot into the system. Like, why the hell can't they, like, I don't know, just have a decent meal after you've lost more blood than you will ever lose in your life, and you've had a near-death experience? Like, well, why the fuck do they come up with like a piece of dry bread? How is that a good investment? And this is obviously a very non-medical point. Like, I had excellent medical care.
Yeah.
The overall concept of what it is to be a woman with reproductive needs, it just blew my mind. It was the first time I'd sort of come up against it, how sort of terrible it is. So I was motivated by the content. And then what was also very exciting to me is, so I met, they were looking for a lawyer, and I knew one of the guys, and then he introduced me to Ida Tin, the founder, and we had a long chat. And I looked around the office, and it was just revelatory to me to, after, more than how long had I been working at that point? More than a decade of legal career. To walk into an office and have it be 70% female. That had never happened in my life before. I'd always been one of the few women in the room. And I mean, not true, right? Like in a law firm, most of the secretaries are women and a
Right.
lot of the juniors are women, but the seniors are not. And the dynamic of going into a team where the top decision makers are women, it just made me realize how much bandwidth I got back from not having to, walk that line that you're always walking when you're a minority. And I think this is probably true for any minority, whatever the identity, dimension is. But if you're, different, then you're spending a lot of your mental space putting everyone else at ease. And the incredible relief when that was not the case really just made me think, wow, I can do some good work here. I've got 30% more work to give. This is wonderful. And so, so I just loved the team, and I loved the ability to feel like we're, creating a different kind of culture and a different, guided by trying to do some excellent work, but maybe just a little differently.
You have economic background, having gone to like LSE, London School of Economics, in Cambridge, and have more economic background. But we're going to be talking about some very important topics in terms of women's health and just, being a co-CEO and what that meant and your time at Clue. So can you tell us about your studies in Clue?
I studied environmental policy and economics for my undergrad, and then I went on to do a law degree and became a lawyer. And I joined Clue, which is a femtech company, a startup here in Berlin, as general counsel originally. So general counsel, that means just the lawyer. In our case, I was the only lawyer to begin with.
Okay.
And then became co-CEO along with someone Audrey Tsang, who is much more of a technical person.
Yeah.
A Silicon Valley tech background. And we became co-CEOs of Clue at a moment when the company was sort of going from being a purely consumer tech app to also being a certified software as medical device app.
Okay.
And so in order to do that other side of things, obviously there's a whole different level of compliance and verification and process, which is quite difficult to marry up with an agile software development mindset, and which we therefore as co-CEOs really sort of changed the company to be able to deliver. So, maybe I'll just summarize by saying, to my mind, now obviously it's great to have an engineering background if you're going to work in, I don't know, say consumer tech, right? There's a lot of stuff that you will just fundamentally understand about the product that those of us who are not from that background don't. And there's a lot of things to be said about the importance of people in management being people who really understand the nuts and bolts of how to make the product. What I will also say is, I think there can be a tendency to think to forget that it's really important that companies that produce consumer tech are extremely oriented around what that consumer tech is for.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And that is a question that all of us can answer who are consumers of that tech. Okay. And as a woman and a person with a cycle, and as a lawyer who understands the point of having, I don't know, standards of evidence, standards of quality control, the point of complying with medical device regulation when you are a medical device that people rely on for health information. You're not just some, consumer shit game off the internet that it doesn't matter whether it breaks or not, right? As soon as it starts to matter, I think we have to hold ourselves to different standards. And this question of what should those standards be? What claims should you make? How do you communicate with your users when your users are somewhere between, just people trying to understand their biology better and what we would in the health sector call patients. These are all questions that actually you don't need a technical background to answer. So you can have, say, a legal background. And I actually think that the mix is really important, because I think what we see when we don't have people from the sort of more social sciences or even humanities in some of these companies is that perspective on just what's it all for can get lost.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So then I might go into a different parallel where, so Clue is an app that deals a lot with data, woman tracking woman, non-binary, whatever, tracking like data. So then I'm curious because then you come from a legal perspective and you bring that insight to Clue. Data's a big thing, especially like protecting people's data. So have you had any challenges with that? And like, how have you, like, when you were there, like, dealt with it, or how do you bring up these topics?
Yeah, I mean, that's an area that we've really majored on at Clue. And again, I think it's super important to take a step back and be like, what's it for? You know, who are we serving, and what is this data doing for our users? And so data privacy is super important at Clue. And I think that flows directly from the fact that it was female founded and remains female led. And why do I think that? I think because unless you are female and you understand that your reproductive health data and your cycle tracking data is, you know, this incredibly intimate, important data set that can give clues about all kinds of, you know, very private health conditions, as well as family planning decisions. And in a world where this is highly politicized still, and getting more politicized again, especially in the US, it's incredibly important that that is private to you. And so we really majored on that. And I think it's important to understand that, you know, we all have these supercomputers in our pockets, right? And they are tracking data all the time. They are absorbing data. The apps are processing a huge amount of data. And some of that data is very important for any app to be successful. So for example, for Clue, right, if we advertise somewhere, every app, every business has to advertise. It can be very helpful to understand attribution. So understand whether it was this advertisement or this article or this piece of content or whatever that made someone download the app versus this other piece. Now, that is a piece of data that most women don't care about. So like that is not, you know, what I would call personally sensitive data. It is personal data technically if it's linkable to your device ID. But something like when you've had your last period, or if you have tracked a miscarriage, or what kind of contraception you track for yourself, or any other number of things is super, super intimate private data. And, you know, we as an app have very often had to make decisions where the question was, well, do we use this data in the way that we think our users want us to use it? Or do we use it in a way that makes, let's say, ad targeting more efficient? And we had as a very clear principle always that we remain committed to using it in a way that our users would be happy with. And I'm bringing this up because I think this is one of these values decisions, right? Like, in principle, as a company, the more data you have and the more ways that you permit yourself to use that data, the more precisely you can target, the clearer your business metrics, all of these things. Sometimes there will be a trade-off between the best possible insight you could have for your business and what is actually at the end of the day good for your users. Sometimes there won't be. Sometimes there's a spectrum and you have to make a decision. But these are values judgments. You know, these are not technical judgments. These are values and, of course, also compliance judgments. And so that was a role that I did perform a lot when I was both as a lawyer and as general counsel.
I want to move on and like slowly like wrap up, I guess. But towards, so pretty much like also the sector, and not only, well, so you said you get there and then you have like this like environment that makes you feel like you can be productive and you can bring a lot, but also the sector itself is one that, you know, is quite important, knowing that, like, for instance, I think in Canada, they had banned women from like clinical like tests and stuff like that in the medical sector in like 1997, in the US in 93. So pretty much like there's gaps in like data on women that I think Clue kind of fills in. But I want to talk about, so you were obviously like co-CEO for a while, and now you're still like part of like investors. So I want to ask how do you feel about like your like current relation to Clue, and like what excites you about the future?
Thanks. I love being an investor in Clue. I think the money is really important, right? Women don't talk enough about money. And we don't talk enough about the fact that money is clout, and where you put your money is where innovation is going to happen and where things are going to happen. And yeah, I mean, maybe less in America, but I find certainly in Europe still there's this like weird, I don't know what it is. It's like, it's some kind of polite idea that if we understand finance and if we understand our bodies, we're somehow not delicate enough. I don't know what it is. Like, I've never particularly tried to be delicate, but you know, there's a sense of like, if we can get those two things right, if we can get money and our bodily autonomy right, we've changed the world. And so I love being an investor in Clue. I'm very excited for especially a lot of the health data, as you say, that Clue is able to collect, because, again, as you say, like, women were systematically excluded from clinical trials. That's one thing. But also the cyclical nature of a woman's biology over time, that time series data is incredibly, it's just under leveraged, right? It's not been taken into account anywhere. And I think we've got some really low-hanging fruit just in our daily lives, even around nutrition, exercise, mood, you know, stuff that isn't necessarily, you know, deep science, but is self-science, really low-hanging fruit. And then we have a ton of super exciting, you know, much deeper sciencey stuff that we don't have time to go into here, but there's also stuff on Clue's website about some of the collaborations that we do with de-identified data. Just to be very clear, this is data that has been de-identified from the original users, but that can be used alongside data set of diagnosis, for instance, on female health conditions. There are questions, you know, as simple as, is there a correlation between your cycle pattern pre-pregnancy and your likelihood for postpartum depression? Can you see ovarian cancer signals show up in cycles before things are too late? I mean, random examples, right? But none of this stuff has been researched, and it really needs to be researched. And it's hard because it's a lot of data, but we have the tools now to crunch that data. And I think there'll be some really exciting discoveries in the next years if we can use it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think it's super important to talk about these things. They're not talked about enough. And I mean, yeah, like in the past like few years, I think there was also a random stat that was like, in the past like 5 years prior to 2022, 60% of like startups like in femtech have been created. So it's like a really evolving field and current field. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with friends and family, and consider giving us a follow or rating on your favorite platform. We'll be back soon to bring more inspiration to your Monday.